Today is January 20, 2025, and this is an oral history for the Archives of Iowa Broadcasting. I'm Paul Yeager, joined by Cliff Brockman as our producer, and Spike Odell is our guest today. And Spike, many people might not know what you look like, but they certainly know what you sound like. You are a radio, let's use it, legend. Do you think of yourself as one of those, Spike?
I hear that occasionally, but I'm just a loudmouth. Yeah.
You're
I made money for what I went to detention in high school for talking too much. So
You and I both. That's the way that
yeah,
goes. Spike, you grew up in the Quad Cities, East Moline born, um,
right.
UT, United Township High School. What was young Spike like? What was inspiring him about radio?
I was just about as average as they get. Matter of fact, 740 some people in my senior graduating class. I graduated right right in the middle of it. So I could have done better, but I was too busy, chasing girls, watching football, stuff like that. But uh, I grew up in Watertown of East Moline. Great people. I always grew up hearing the fact that if you lived in Watertown, you grew up on the wrong side of the tracks. And my dad, who was the chief of police at East Moline, he would always tell me, "No, you grew up on the best side of the tracks." So that's how I remember that. Yeah.
And you are a kid that at the time, 50s, 60s, 70s, I mean, it's all fun. Quad Cities was booming at that time. I mean, agriculture, there's manufacturing. It was quite a heyday for town, and I'm hoping your dad wasn't too busy, but being in police, you always kind of were. So, did you ever aspire to be a police officer?
No, not at all. I can vividly recall one day when I was before Dad was chief. He was out patrolling in the car, and I was in the front yard. I was probably 8, 9, 10 years old. I don't know. Dad pulled in with the squad car, got out, and he was just bloodied from head to toe. His shirt was ripped. His pants were ripped. He went into a bar all by himself, and 3 or 4 people jumped him, and it was a fight. And I thought, why do you do this, Dad? Why do you do this? But that was his love. That's what he wanted to do. And I always call him the last Andy Griffith of Mayberry, because you get in the car and go with Dad down the street. Everybody knew my dad. He was from the same high school I went to, UT, United Township High School. He knew everybody. Everybody knew him. His funeral was just filled to the brim with cars going a half a mile down the road. So that makes me feel good.
Well, in that sense, then everybody knew him, just like everybody kind of knows you. So I guess in that similarities, you two were the line. So I suppose you thought radio was maybe a little safer, a little more fun.
I just kind of just happened into it. Uh, Not really happened. I liked radio. Uh, we always listened to the radio. The Beatles did it to me. I heard the Beatles, and that was it. So I started listening to the radio. Uh, and uh, it was always fascinating to me. I never ever thought I would end up doing it. Uh, my buddy David Sands, who's married to longtime anchor Paula Sands, the Quad Cities, he and I were just like this. We're best buddies still to this day. We grew up together, went to school together. We went our separate way for college. I went to Nebraska. He went to Lewis University, and he sent me a cassette tape. One day, I opened it up, put it in the player, and listened. And he was on the campus radio station using my name. He thought he thought my name sounded better on the air than his, so he used it. And I just thought, wow, that's that is so cool. So let me look at this a little harder. I went and visited him. He put me on the air for a weekend shift up there, and that was it. I was hooked. It's over.
Well, let's go back to the name for a minute because Spike Odell's your real name, right?
William Thomas Odell is my real name. But my mother and dad were dancing to the jukebox at Jake's Cafe in Watertown, and she was out to here pregnant. And her water broke while she was dancing to a Spike Jones record on the jukebox. And dad said, let's get that little Spike to the hospital before he's born right here. And I was that ever since.
So Spike, no radio name. You didn't have to come up with anything. So when David took your name, he knew what a good sounding name was. How'd you get it back?
I said, stop it. No.
Yeah, I'm sure David
no,
took that well.
well, it went pretty naturally. He used it all the way through college. I wasn't in radio yet. I went to work in the factory, Farmall International Harvester. So after that, uh, I would sit at the gate at Farmall listening to the radio. All these because my interest was peaked then, and I would listen to stations just everywhere, all over the nation. And one day I was reading the newspaper, uh, become a radio star, come here to school. It was the Academy of Radio and Television, ART, in Bettendorf. Chuck Hamilton, former KSTT disc jockey, sales manager, he ran that school. And I thought, what, I'm going to try that, just, on my off time. And, and he saw something there that nobody else saw. And I could tell he worked with me pretty hard. And I 6 weeks later graduated with a pat on the back and a diploma, but couldn't get a job. Took me a year and a half to get a job. Nobody wanted to hire me because I didn't have experience.
Ah, the old didn't have the experience line. It still holds true today. So what finally broke the door down to get you a job?
I had, with my dad being the chief of police, he knew the general manager of this new radio station at East Moline, which it was WEMO, which went on to become WLLR, and I think Cool now has that frequency, but or did. He knew the general manager, and I applied there. And once again, he said, "Thanks, Spike. We'll keep you in mind, but we're looking for people with experience." They hadn't been on the air yet; they were just building the station. So one night at Farmall, I'm listening to the radio station as it comes on the air for the very first day. And I'm listening to it, what they're doing. They're, technical problems and bugs and all that for first day, but I'm listening. Okay. So I go to bed, get off the second shift. I go to bed about, I guess, 12 o'clock, midnight. And the next morning, the phone rings at 7:30, and he says, Spike, this is Jack Ramsey, WMO. You still want a job here? I said, yeah. Here I am sleeping still. I said, yeah. He says, if you're here in an hour, you got a job. So I was there in an hour. It was just down the street. I did about 8 hours on the air that day. So exciting. Learned the board, did it all. Went home, had a migraine headache, threw up, and was happy as a clam.
Was the migraine from the stress?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Scared to death. Yeah. Yeah.
8 hours, no training, really. I mean, other than the 6 week school, no experience. Uh, but I mean, that first day, I mean, you're learning the board, you're talking, I assume. You're
Oh,
announcing
yeah.
records,
Yeah.
and are you doing news and all of that at the
Oh,
same
yeah.
time?
Gotta hit the network at straight up 12. Yeah. Yeah.
And at that point, so where is the station at that point, physically
It is
located?
East Moline,
But
downtown.
it was downtown East Moline.
Yeah, right next to the jewelry store where every night at 5 o'clock they'd close the safe next door and the needle on the record would skip. True. We couldn't figure out what was causing that for the longest time.
So you're on WEMO for how long?
Well, I worked there for about 6 months, and he came in to me. I was doing kind of a midday thing before I went to second shift at the factory. And he came in to me one day and said, Spike, we're going to have to let you go. We can't we can't afford to pay you. You know, they were having a hard time keeping up with the bills, I guess, and, which, you know, news stations usually do to get going. And I was heartbroken. I said, you have to let me go. He said, yeah, I'm sorry. I said, what about if I did this for free? And he says, you're kidding me. I said, no, I'll do it for free. I want experience. So I did that for free for another month or so. And then I heard there was an opening for a part-time job at WQUA over in Moline. So I took a little audition tape I had put together, and on the way to work, I'm in my Barney Fife guard outfit with, the badge and everything. I walk into WQUA, and I'm at the reception desk, and I said, "Can I speak with Jim Mahaney, the program director?" And the receptionist, before she could say anything, Jim Mahaney pokes his head out the door from behind her and says, "Oh, I told her my name. I wanted to see him." And he pokes his head out the door and he says, "You Spike Odell?" I says, "Yeah." "You looking for a job?" I said, "Yeah. Yeah." He says, "I've heard you." He says, "Can you be here tonight at midnight?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "I got to work in a guard outfit." He said, "I don't care. They don't see you." So that's how that started. So I did that for about a year, part time, overnight, weekends, fill in, stuff like that. I really learned the board and hold the craft pretty well there in the rock and roll era.
And what year is this?
Oh, 77 probably. Yeah. Because that's the year my dad died. I remember the people at the station. I heard it on my station that my dad had died. It was it's a tough way to hear it, but I mean, I had known it, but as soon as I got in the car after I heard it, I heard it on the air. So
You just said something that's very interesting to me. You found your voice. You figured out technical is one thing, but finding your voice as a DJ, how would you describe what that voice was at that time? Were you joking? Were you serious? Were you just, hey man, I'm real? Or are you Wolfman Jack?
I was everybody I listened to. I always told after I got established a little bit, I would tell people try to get into the business that find somebody you like and emulate them, but then make it your own. There were so many people that I admired on the air that I kind of enjoyed their style, and you hear bits and pieces of all that, but eventually you craft it into what you are, which is unique. That's what sets you apart from everybody else.
Spike, where did you find your voice to be on the radio? What inspired you to be Spike?
A combination of a lot of people, people I listened to, people I really enjoyed. I took characteristics from this person, that person, uh, used them, failed a lot, succeeded in some, and you feed off of that, and then out of all that, it becomes uniquely you. You are unique to nobody else. I mean, you are just you, which I always enjoyed. Everybody always told me, you don't sound like everybody else. And I thought, good, good. I don't want to sound like everybody else.
Do you get the sense that that's what made radio early on was the personalities and people were different?
Yeah, yeah. Uh, and they don't always appeal to the person you're wanting to hire you. You present yourself as this package, and they go, "Oh, I don't know." My job at KSTT, the old saying goes, Fred Epstein, who was the boss at KSTT, he after a while, Rich Erickson was the PD, and he went to the wall for me to get me on the air, and I think much to the chagrin of the boss. And the boss didn't like me. Matter of fact, he'd call me a lot on the hotline and say, "What did you say that for?" One day, he actually even came in and said, "You're the worst person I've ever heard," or whatever. Why do you say this or why do you do that? And I had about had it. I didn't have to have the job. I was an international harvester making pretty decent money. And he walked into the studio that day, and I thought, well, this is it. It's confrontation, him and I. And I said, well, Mr. Epstein, I'm sorry, you could obviously do this a lot better than me. I said, here's the headphones. You've got 30 seconds. And I got up off the chair and I started walking out. He says, wait a minute. Sit down. We'll talk about this later. I said, yeah, okay, let's do that. So in between the time we talked later, the old story goes, according to my boss, Rich Erickson, he had gone to the bank in Bettendorf with the receipts of the previous day. And the drive-in teller just knew who he was. And she says, how do you like that Spike O'Dell? And he says, why do you like him? She goes, oh, I love that guy, blah, 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 blah. And then he goes to a different store, and somebody else says, that Spike, he sure is wacky. We sure have fun listening to him. And so he comes back and talks to Rich, and then he and I have the conversation. And I guess that's what saved me, a bank teller at the Bettendorf Bank. So thanks to her, I had a career that was extended at KSTT.
A bank teller saves your job. Did you think that that's how? I mean, that's movie stuff right there, Spike.
It's life, It's, I just, life just happens and you fall into it. It's like, I tell everybody, I'm one of the rare people in this business of radio that was never fired. I never got fired. I never gave an audition tape to anybody for a full-time job. I did at QUA for a part-time, but after I started working part-time or full-time, everybody called me up. I didn't have to call them up, which is very rare. I'm not bragging. I just consider myself very fortunate that's how it worked. And I didn't work at 30 different television or radio stations either. I worked at just 4 or 5, I guess, which is rare. So I still consider myself very lucky in that case. By the way, I'm getting a cold, by the way, as you can hear probably. So I'm sorry.
But that's supposed to make you sound even better, Spike.
Yes,
Lower
yes,
and.
yes.
Well, why is it? Why is it you think you never had to apply for jobs? Why is it they called you?
Quite frankly, ratings were good. This, in the world of radio, that news travels fast. Uh, when somebody hears somebody's doing very well in a market, they're always looking for the next guy at their station. So I started getting calls. And when I was at KIIK 104 in Davenport, I actually won the Billboard Magazine Top 40 Jock of the Year award, and that for a medium market, not a large market, but a medium market, and that news traveled fast, and I started getting
Mhm.
calls from everywhere: Dallas, San Diego, San Fran, New York, Atlanta, Miami. Uh, but the problem there was KIIK took pretty good care of me financially. And they were paying me more than what it would have been worth to go to those stations, start all over again. So I refused until I got the call from Chicago.
And was it always just about money on why you
No,
refused those other stations?
no, it had to fit. I once talked to the guys at WBZ in Boston, and having been in Boston, I didn't want any part of that. I had nothing against Boston, but personally, I didn't want any part of them. East Moline, Illinois. I just didn't think I fit there. There are other places you got to consider that. Are you going to fit, uh, or is it all about the dollar? Yeah, money plays into it, sure, but it's got to fit. And I figured Chicago was close enough to the Quad Cities that I might have a chance of fitting.
What year did you win Billboard, that first Billboard
That would have
award?
been probably 86 or early 87, probably.
Okay, so you're barely 10 years in your career and you get this top award. Did that seem like the ultimate?
I, I, I was flabbergasted when I got it. Like, you try hard, you want to do your best, you want to be different, you want to be unique, uh, and you want to be noticed. And it's my job to make people listen. And evidently, it worked very well, well enough that it got the attention of others.
Well, what worked in the Quad Cities that connected? I mean, you talk about the bank teller and the dry cleaner and the wherever your general manager goes that, oh, we love Spike. Your personality is extremely warm and engaging, Spike. I have to admit that. And is it the genuine side? Do you think that people this is one of us? This is an East Bowling guy. This is a UT Panther.
Yeah, yeah, I think you're exactly right. It's, you know, uh, my dad was that way. My family is. Like I said, everybody knew my dad. He was well loved by everybody. I grew up in that shadow. Uh, I I I went to work in a station that's my hometown with a bunch of guys that didn't live there. They were coming in from other places, but I lived there. I knew every back road. I knew all the cafes, the restaurants, the places to hang out. So I could relate, probably nothing against my coworkers, but I could automatically relate better, I think, which was a huge advantage for me at that time.
You did overnights, you said, for a while. What shift are you doing here at these stations now?
Well, at KSTT, that was my first full time job in the morning. KIIK was morning. The part time stuff was at WEMO and QUA.
What is different about shifts? What's different about the morning? Why does the morning have to be a certain way that's different than afternoons or
People
evenings?
are waking up. Uh, for me in Chicago, I was the first voice a lot of people heard, a million people every day. And they can tell by the sound of your voice whether the world blew up last night or not. So you're a source of information, you're a source of comfort, you're a source of familiarity. They just everybody has their comfort zone. So people, a morning show is where about half of the audience is for the entire day. And in Chicago, it was 40% of our revenue. And we had a radio station in Chicago that billed about $42 million when I left that last year. So, you know, there's there's a lot of responsibility to that morning show. It never really kicked in for me till I was presented the morning show in a tragic way. But I remember waking up a couple days after they said, "Okay, we want you to do the morning show in Chicago." I woke up in a cold sweat with just thinking of all that responsibility. Man, I can't screw this up. I cannot. You don't want to be any different, but you don't want to screw it up either.
What happened to make that phone call that they were moving you to mornings? What was the tragedy?
The tragedy was uh, the franchise for WGN at the time was it used to be Wally Phillips back in the day, and then Bob Collins replaced Wally Phillips. Bob was lovable, laughable, kind of he'll even tell you, a sophisticated hillbilly. Uh, he was, there were a lot of comparisons with him and I. We were totally different people, but how we related to people were the comparisons, which I took as a compliment. Uh, I remember going into work at WGN one afternoon. I was doing the afternoon show, and I was walking up the steps from uh, the back entrance, and Bob was coming down the steps. Bob Collins was, and I said, hey, Bobby, what's up? He says, I'm going flying. He says, I'm getting the hell out of here. I'm going flying. He was a pilot. And so I said, all right, buddy, have fun. I goosed him on the butt as he went past me. And he turned around and he said, I think I love you. And that was Bob, So he walked that way. I went this way. I did my radio show. And not long after I was on the air, we started getting reports of a mid-air plane collision, north Chicagoland, Waukegan. And it became clear over time it was Bob, but we were protecting his wife. We didn't want her to hear it without official news. He had died in a mid-air collision. That day is a day I've never heard audio from it. I don't want to hear it. I remember having to break the news to Chicago that the person they loved, the station franchise, was dead. Uh, I was on Fox News that night. I was on CNN that night. I was on everything local, obviously. Uh, it was just a whirlwind that I was mentally beaten down, numb, sad. We didn't know what we were going to do. So I did his show the next morning, and for a couple of weeks till they officially said, okay, it's yours. They looked outside at some pretty big talent to come in, but they decided to go with me.
And that's, I think, around 2000 when that
Yeah,
happened.
yeah.
And I would guess the show that you did after Bob's death was different than what you had done before, but you were doing what radio is supposed to do, and that's connect with an audience, give the audience a chance. I'm guessing you probably took calls that, tell us a Bob story, or, just people sharing. Was that
Yeah,
what that
yeah.
those first few mornings were
The
like?
room was filled with media, TV cameras, reporters, the staff, the big wigs from up on the 19th floor of the Tribune Tower. It was a weird situation, and I did not script anything. I just kind of let it happen. I remember going on the air 5 seconds before I went on the air. I didn't know what I was going to say, but I said, good morning. It's 5 o'clock in Chicago. This is the Bob Collins Show. Bob is not here today. He's listening from a different place. And it just went on from there. Uh, it was, like I say, I've never heard any audio from that day because that day and, and 9/11, I don't want to hear anything because I was on the air both times.
What prepared you to be able to handle it and to approach it that way?
I don't know if you're ever really prepared. I just know that everybody around me was freaking out. They were just pulling their hair out. They were sad. They were confused. They
Mhm.
thought, we're done. It's over. And I thought, somebody's got to hold this together. You know, somebody's got to try to be a voice of reason. Not that I am, but I thought, man, I got to try. I got to try. I got to connect the dots here at least.
Mhm.
You just kind of let it go, let it happen. Uh, Inform without overdoing it. It was. I have no idea how I did that day. I really don't. Uh, but but managed to pull it off somehow.
Days in broadcasting that are like that. You mentioned 9/11. That's a day that, yeah, nobody wants to really go back and see. And it was so different that day. Did it cement to you the importance of radio in people's
Oh
lives
yeah,
on days like that?
yeah. Radio is always a part of people's lives. When I went from a rock station, KIIK in Davenport, to a an adult talk station, if you will, in Chicago. Excuse me. Well, it was. Say that question again because I want to answer it right.
At that point, when those events happen on radio, did that cement to you the importance of radio in people's lives and how broadcasting can serve a role other than just to, hey, it's a zany joke day?
Yeah, exactly. You have to do it that way. I always tell people, uh, in Chicago, it was so different from what I did before. Maybe if I went out and didn't talk to a group of high school kids or something, I would say to you, listen to WGN. They go, no, no. We listened to rock and roll here, rock and roll there, whatever the station was. And I said, okay, all right, I get it. I was young once. I did too. Didn't really care for talk radio. But then I would say, do you listen to the Cubs? Oh, yeah, we love the Cubs. I said, that's on WGN. I said, well, do you listen to WGN when you want school to be canceled when the snow's real bad? Oh, yeah, we always, that's on WGN. You listen to it. So there are bits and pieces that you listen to and you don't even know it. And that's what radio is for. You plug into what you have to have. And people knew where to get what we gave. So I thought that's pretty cool.
I I guess we kind of skipped from the Quad Cities to Chicago in a hurry.
Excuse me.
What finally made you make that decision to go? Why did you finally say yes? And were you back in that cold sweat that you talked about? Will my, lack of a better term, act translate from the Quad Cities to Chicago?
I remember getting off the air at KIIK one morning show, walked into the house. My wife, it was probably 10:30 in the morning. My wife says, there's some guy named Dan Fabian in Chicago who wants to talk to you. I thought, what do he wants to talk to me for? We do two different things, I rock and roll. He's talk station. I said, okay, well, maybe he wants a referral, somebody, whatever. So I thought, okay, I'll call him up, see what's going on. So I did. He says, hey, we'd like to talk to you about maybe working here. I thought, what? What are you talking about? That's not what I do. He says, I'm going to have an airplane ticket for you at the Moline Airport tomorrow. I want you to fly up here after you get off the air. Let's talk. I thought, well, okay, WGN is a station that everybody in radio school always compared everything else to. Do they do it this way at WGN? Do they do it that way at WGN? And I thought, well, geez, I'm going to at least get a tour of WGN. So I thought, yeah, I'll do that. I flew up there. He met me at the door, met everybody, all the dignitaries. I forgot all their names. We walked around. We talked a little bit. He says, I want to throw you in the studio and I want you to do a simulated radio show. And I thought, what? What? I got to do a simulated radio show. So that was very uncomfortable. But I see what he was doing. He wanted to see how I performed on the spot. So I went in there and did a radio show where he lined up the calls. People were lined up to talk to me on the air. And they were cussing at me. They wanted to know how I would handle everything. They were swearing, saying things they shouldn't say. They were bringing up this and that. And they just wanted to see how I react to it. And before it was all over, he came in to me and he says, all right, before we stop this, I want you to do he held it out like this. He said, I want you to do a 60-second commercial on this. And this was one of those big floppy disks that literally flopped back in the day. I didn't have a computer then. I didn't know what the heck that thing was. I knew it had something to do with a computer, but I had no idea what that thing was. He says, I said, I don't know what it is. He goes, and he walked out. So I started doing a 60-second commercial for this thing. I had no idea what it was. And after all is said and done and I'm hired, I'm working there, he says, that got you the job, He says, that was the funniest thing I ever heard in my life. And I have no idea what I said. I don't know. I just made something up. But before I left that day, I went back into his office with him and Laura Gladstone, the assistant PD. Excuse me, my voice is cracking. This cold is killing me. Anyway, I'm sitting there and I'm talking to him. And in walks the general manager, Wayne Friesman. And he says, or Dan introduced me to him, and he says, Wayne says to me, he says, Spike, would working at a job in a market like this be intimidating? And I thought, geez, what's the right answer? you know, how do I answer this? So I thought I'd just be honest. I said, yeah, yeah, I would a little bit. He says, good, it should. Nice to meet you. And he walked out. So I took off, went back to the airport, flew back home to Moline. It wasn't a half hour after I walked in the house that night. He was on the phone and he offered me the job. And I thought, what the heck just happened? What the heck? I'm working at WGN now. Whoa.
First day you walk in, first time you hit the on air button, what was going through your mind?
Scared to death, but excited. I just thought, you know what? Do what brought you to the dance. Nobody's going to like it at first, and they didn't. I was roundly criticized, but little bits and pieces. I was always a person that, even in the Quad Cities, I would try an approach to something, or what they call a bit on the radio. Uh, uh, I would do it on the air, and sometimes they work, sometimes they failed miserably, but you knew right off the bat if they worked or didn't with people's reactions. So I wasn't ever afraid to try a bit. A lot of them fell flat. A lot of them were extremely successful. And that's kind of what happened. They started building on each other, and your personality works into that. Your ability. I did a lot of phone work with callers in the Quad Cities. That helped me a lot in Chicago. Uh, I really had to knuckle down and study harder, because uh, before every show in Chicago, you don't know what's going to come up. I mean, you have things you want to bring up, which you do, but in those times where you got free time, you don't know what else is going to come up. So I always wanted to make sure I knew a little bit about everything, just enough to say I'm familiar with it, and maybe speak a little intelligence to it. So I really learned how to read all the newspapers, uh, and when the internet came along, how to really get into that. So it everybody thinks you just lollygagging, and no, you work, you work, and people say, oh, you're only on the air for 4 hours. No, you're not. You're on the air all day because you're working for that next show.
When you say you're taking calls, so that's like crowd work for a comedian. Are you doing these live? Are you doing these taped and then you're playing them back?
No, they're live. Well, 7 second delay. 7 second delay.
Okay. All right. So we got so Bob in Waukegan calls. Bob's on the line. What's going on, Bob? Is it a general, or did you stick to a topic that you wanted? Because that's how you could kind of direct the
Yeah,
traffic.
well, maybe he's responding to what we threw out there to talk about, or maybe he wants to bring something up he's not sure about. He's asking a question. If I don't know the answer, somebody in a million people plus audience does, and I'll get an answer. WGN was so big, it was so huge, it was the number one listened to radio station forever up there. Uh, so you will get an answer if you don't know the answer. And I'm not too proud to say, I don't know. Somebody help me. So that's the beauty of a big station like that.
Well, in the DNA of that bit, and it's not a bit, it's a staple in radio, is to get callers and interaction and say, I hear it, I hear it all the time here. When you take your kids to school, do you get stuck on the drop-off line and you don't know what are those people doing ahead of you? Has that happened to you? Phone lines are open. Give us a call now. I mean, that's the type you hear that today. Did you pioneer that? Who pioneered that?
Oh, boy, I don't know who pioneered that. I know Wally Phillips, who I, I actually ended up using his office there at the Tribune Tower. I was in his office. Wally was the the person they attribute to talk radio and people calling in. He took the first calls from people way back in the early '60s. Uh, he is considered by a lot of people the godfather of talk radio. So that's how all that happened. It happened right where I was seated, which is pretty cool.
And when you're on WGN, are you is I mean, it is a talk station. You're not playing music. So was that different to not have to be saying the Allman Brothers are coming up next and Queen after that instead of traffic and weather coming up on the
Yeah,
sevens? We've got this. It's
yeah.
different.
Oh, it is. We could play music if we wanted to, but there had to be a reason for it. Uh, every time a record was played, we didn't have a blanket music license at WGN. Most stations have one. A music station literally has to have one, but we were pay per play. So if I played whatever tune, Happy Birthday or whatever, you paid for it. So you had to log what you played. And there was a day when I first started there that Chicago radio was such a union shop. I had a guy sitting next to me. He was called the music turner, the record turner. He was in the musicians union. Only he could start the record. I had to tell him what I wanted. He would go get it. He would put it on the turntable or the cart or whatever, and he would push the button or start the record. I couldn't do that. Matter of fact, I couldn't touch my controls. It was all engineers that did that. So I learned the hand signals, everything. So I might, pick my nose and push a button sometimes. So you got to be careful.
Totally different from your days when you learned the board and you learned how the cart machine worked and the 8 track, and totally different for those that part of your career.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I remember.
Yeah. All right. Hold on here, Spike, because I have some things. You mentioned bits. I I asked people to, what was their favorite story, and I think everybody you connect you Spike connected with people differently. The people in Hanover, Illinois, remember you talking about Mallard Fest, and you were given some free duckwurst because you were nice to them. You used to do at KSTT the stiff of the day. You would have the chickens play in the mood. You would ring a phone booth. You had these bits. Can you remember them all? And what was it like when somebody talked to you on the street, when they would figure out who you were, and they would ask you, Spike, this meant the world to me. What did that mean when that
Well, it's
happened?
cool to bring a little entertainment to people. I do remember Ballard Fest. We had a house up in Galena for several years. We'd go up to the territory there when I lived in Chicago. We'd go up there for the weekend to get away from it all. But we go down to Hanover into where they process the mallards. I do remember Ballard Fest, the big parade, and all that stuff. Yeah, I remember that. Stiff of the day was somebody would nominate somebody to be a stiff. They did something stupid or something. So they'd read the story or they'd send me the story. I would read it, and then I would find a record that I considered that day the worst record I had come across, and that was the stiff record. So a stiff person, we would dedicate a stiff record, and they were the stiff of the day, and we'd send them a certificate. The phone booth thing, I just thought that'd be cool just to get all these back when they had phone booths. I'd stop and get all the telephone numbers of all these phone booths. And I would say, okay, I'm ringing a telephone right now. It's on Brady Street and such intersection. First person there, I got dinner for two at whatever restaurant. And it really started causing a ruckus. And I was told by our station lawyers that we don't want you to do that anymore. Somebody almost got into an accident, so I had to stop that. That yeah. I also remember the power of the radio too. When I was at KIIK, I would call it. It's time to nab a nerd. Somebody would call in and say, Spike, my car was just stolen. I saw the guy, he took off, he's going this way. So I get on the radio and say, there's a red Toyota going this way. It was just taken from this address or whatever. And more often than not, we would find that guy that stole the car. We did that 2 or 3 times. I thought that was pretty cool.
Is radio still like
Yeah.
that, where you can have fun like that? What changed?
Uh, consultants, I think. uh, not to say consultants don't do good work. There's a lot of them that do some good work, but so many of them. The old joke is, and I hope I don't make anybody angry, but the old joke for us guys on the air was consultants are people that couldn't do it on the air. So they went off and did a job to tell everybody else to do what they couldn't do, which is true in a lot of cases, and not so true in other cases. But it got to the point, well, where I know when I was, for a short time, I was in Charlotte, North Carolina. It's when FM stations were catching up with AM stations, and everybody got real paranoid. And they had consultants, and I was told only to talk at this time, or we wrote this down on a card. Please say this at that time. That took all the spontaneity and the fun of personality radio out of it for me, which is one of the reasons I left there. And it was starting to get that way in Chicago. There were I can remember people saying you can't say anything that that talks about anything before 1965 or whatever, because we're going for uh, younger audience, or what. They were so afraid of being looked at as being old, or we don't want you to say degrees. It's 40 degrees at O'Hare Airport. You can't say degrees. Why? That's what it is. It's just 40, according to the consultant. It was just silly stuff like that you could start seeing adding up. And it's just like everybody on the air is going, what? What are they doing this for? Uh,
Well, it sounds like your boss at the very beginning, who didn't see your bits, didn't necessarily connect with your bits until they went into the community and they were at the dry cleaner or the bank, and they're like, "I love that spike." I mean, it's that reality part. So, do you think that there is still a place for personality? But those are the people who are now the TikTok stars and the social media stars, the YouTubers. They have that personality. They're doing the fun bits that you used to do on the radio. They've moved and made that other medium. Do you ever see the connection between the two?
Spot on. That's exactly what's going on. Uh, you know, back when I was on the air uh, in Chicago, there was the pie looked like this, and when I left, it was like this, or slices. We had you know 3/4 of the pie, and now radio listeners are about an eighth of the pie because you have options. You've got podcasts, you've got playlists, uh, you've got TikTok, you got Snapchat, you got Instagram, you've got satellite radio, you've got there's everybody used to funnel back to AM radio or FM radio because that's all there was. And then with the advent of the internet and the digital world, it just opened up to hundreds of different avenues. So the radio audience, which was this big, shrunk to that big. And it's it's sad. It I'm just happy I worked for the most part in the heyday of radio, because it's never going to be like that again.
Would you advise anybody to get into, if you had a high school senior right now, would you advise him or her to get into radio?
Yeah, if for a particular reason, yeah. Uh, I mean, there's still going to be your occasional spots of notoriety uh, at some larger stations. If you have a particular craft you do well, sports, uh, farm, markets, money, uh, stuff like that. If you have a specific angle, you can survive. But being the do all rock jock personality, those days they're kind of drying up. Kind of sad.
Okay, WGN, I think still Harry Carey and the Cubs. I still think of you. I think of Bob Collins. I mean, I think of all these people, and again, it sounds like those era of personalities. When you broaden it out, there's still the Howard Stern. He's gone to satellite radio, but still has his roots. Um, with radio. I look at Orion Seacrest. He started in radio, kept radio. In fact, I think he still does a radio show. Rick Dees. I mean, there's just not the same number of DJs as there once were. Does that make you feel sad?
Yeah, it does. But I also understand that we live in a world that's always going to change. Uh, it's like they say, a shark will die in the water if it doesn't keep moving. So the industry has to keep moving. Uh, it may move in a direction that you're not comfortable with or you don't like, but that's what happens when you get older, which we all are doing. We always liked it the way it was when we were there, but it's got to move. I get that. I understand that. Uh, it's sad to me, but that's that's the way it is. You got to accept that.
Yeah. And a big change too was voice tracking. And to that, I'm guessing took some of the spontaneity
Yeah,
out as well.
yeah, yeah. You can do your show, your underwear in in Nashville, Tennessee, where I am, and have it broadcast all over the nation, and people don't know the difference. Uh, that's cool, but it's also when you do that, you take the heart out of the radio station. Live and local is also translated, in my opinion, to heart and feeling. Uh, this has all come about because the powers that be are programming with pencils and erasers instead of their hearts and their heads. So, uh, but it's it's business. It's the world we live in. It's sad to me and maybe to the listener who used to listen back in those days and enjoyed it that way, but it's going to change. It's going to keep going.
We have two questions left. And the second one is coming, but the first one, let's give something funny. Let's change the mood a little bit here, Spike. What's the most humorous story that happened to you either in the Quad Cities or in WGN? One of those I've laughed so hard already today in a couple of your things. My stomach hurts. But what is one of those funny things, humorous stories, and it can be on air, it can be off air, that you want people to know?
Uh, well, there's so many of them, but I tell you one that just pops up in my head real quick, and probably the same for all of them, really. I used to have a guy in Chicago named Pete, lived out in the western suburbs. He would call me. He was kind of a regular. I knew who he was when he called. And one day he was sitting out at his pool in his backyard. He had a swimming pool, and I said, "That's back when cordless phones were the new big deal. Nobody had them back then." But I said, "Where are you? I hear water." He says, "I'm out of my pool." And I said, "You're on a cordless phone?" He goes, "Yeah." And I said, "Oh, that's pretty cool." I'll tell you what, I'll give you $50 if you keep that phone to your ear and go jump in the pool. So he says, when we talked, he says, $50? I said, yeah. He says, throw in a dinner someplace. I said, okay, all right. So he did it. It was hilarious. So that started a bit, if you will. He would call up every week and we would try to figure out a way to kill that phone. He came out of that swimming pool. He came out of that swimming pool and that phone still worked. We're still talking. It's a little gargly, but it still works. So the next day he calls in, or the next week he calls in, and we tried to kill the phone by putting it in the dryer on the fluff cycle on the dryer, and it was hilarious to hear that phone tumble in your dryer. And he pulls it out, and it's still working. We did that over and over. It was hilarious, and we finally killed the phone when we put it in a bowl of Jello and let it set up overnight. So that's just
Now and
that's one of the stupid things we did that was just hilarious.
And now the part, Spike, where you tell us that segment was sponsored by the phone manufacturer. And
Yeah, yeah. These days they sell everything, so it wouldn't surprise me. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, we could do a whole nother history of that one. Let's close with this. Your biography. You've got a Wikipedia page. It's got a lead line. If you could rewrite it, or how should it be written for your biography, Spike?
A lead line or the last line?
The lead line. You can do both. You can do both. I'll take the lead and the last.
Uh, just just a kid from East Moline who followed his dream, and it happened. Uh, that's basically it. I never ever thought I would enjoy the success. I ended up working at the station where everybody wanted to work. Everybody wanted to work there. I never, in my wildest imagination, thought I would be picked to work there. I did. And when I got it, I thought, I can't screw this up. I've been given the lifetime opportunity here. So I think it worked out pretty well. I'm not the greatest broadcaster. I'm not the greatest WGN ever had. I don't ever pretend to be that, but I wasn't bad. you know, it worked okay.
Good career from the 70s to 2009 there for your radio career, and you're done. You haven't done anything since retirement other than paint
I
and ham radio.
ham radio. I talk to people all over the world. It's funny because I got my license there about 10 years after I retired. It was cold. I thought, man, maybe I'll go back on the air. So I studied real hard. I'm not a very good uh, engineer or electrical guy, but I studied hard. I passed. It's kind of difficult. It's a tough test. I got my license and I talk to people all over the world. I say, they paid me money for years, 33 years, to be a professional broadcaster. And now I get nothing for being an amateur broadcaster in amateur radio. So, but if I had to wrap it all up and if somebody said, "What do you want on your tombstone?" I'd probably say, I would just wanted to read, "Here lies Spike O'Dell. He was a pretty nice guy." That's okay.
And he was pretty nice to give us so much time today. Spike Odell, thank you so very much. Great stories. I love listening to them.
Thank you. Don't believe a word I said. It was all made up. That was a bit, by the way.
Yeah, this whole interview has been a
It
bit.
was
I
a
love it.
bit. Yeah. Thank you, Paul. I appreciate it.
All right, Spike Odell, longtime WGN, Quad City native, East Moline born. This has been an oral history for the Archives of Iowa Broadcasting. You did get into Iowa a couple of times,
Oh
so
yeah.
we consider you in the family. We love it.
Thank you.
My thanks to Cliff Brockman. This has been the oral history for the Archives of Iowa Broadcasting. Thank you for watching. Keep watching on our YouTube channel.